of Ukraine, Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk, and I'm honored to invite the Speaker of Sejm of the Republic of Latvia, Madam Daiga Mierina, with the welcoming speeches, please.
Stefančuka kungs, ekscelences, kolēģi, draugi. Nu pat mums ar augstākās radas priekšsēdētāju Stefančuku kungu bija gods vadīt plaši pārstāvētu parlamentāriešu samitu, kurā bija jūtama vienotība faktiski visos Ukrainas atbalsta jautājumos. Cita starpā samitā kopīgajā paziņojumā mēs izcēlējam arī atbildības jautājumu kā priekšnoteikumu ilgtspējīgam mieram un drošībai. Tā nu ir viena mācība no mūsu pašu vēstures, bet arī jaunāko laiku vēstures. Nesodāmība iedrošina agresorus uz aizvien jauniem noziegumiem. Tādēļ esmu gandarīta un pateicīga, ka ekspertu līmenī jūs padziļināti diskutēsiet tieši par šiem atbildības jautājumiem. Mums kopīgi ir jāturpina mērķtiecīgs un neatlaidīgs darbs pie tāda atbildības mehānisma izveidošanas, kas nodrošinās iespējas saukt pie atbildības arī Krievijas augstāko lēmumu pieņēmējus. Mācības, protams, jāmeklē nevien vēsturē. Ukrainas varonīgā cīņa šodien mums piedāvā mācības, kas jāizmanto savas aizsardzības spēju stiprināšanai un ievainojamības mazināšanai. Mēs skaidri apzināmies, ka Krievijas
that Russia's aggression goes beyond the boundaries of Ukraine, because it is clear that Russia is targeting democracy, the rule of law, and our lifestyle. And it all started in 2014.
Uzbrukumi, migrācija kā ierocis, sabotāžas. Šie uzbrukumi nebeigsies ar Krievijas agresijas Ukrainā apturēšanu. Krievija būs ilgtermiņa drauds. Nav šaubu, ka Krievija mēģinās paplašināt un kāpināt uzbrukuma intensitāti un agresivitāti pret mums. Tātad mums ir jāspēj sniegt viss nepieciešamais atbalsts Ukrainas uzvaras tuvināšanai un vienlaikus jāspēj iegrožot Krievijas spējas uzbrukt demokrātijai un likuma varai arī citur. Mācīšanās, pielāgošanās draudu attīstībai ir patstāvīgs process. Es augstu vērtēju ekspertu ieguldījumu šajā procesā, lai jums intelektuāli izaicinošas un radošas diskusijas. Paldies!
Шановна дорога Дайго, шановні експерти, шановні друзі, сьогодні справді дуже важливий день, не просто тому, що це третій саміт, а це важливий день, тому що ми продовжуємо дуже тому що на відміну від інших самітів, парламентський саміт якраз і вирізняється тим, що ми намагаємося більш комплексно підійти до обговорення цих питань. Що це не тільки будуть політичні заяви лідерів парламентів, а це буде глибока експертна робота, а також окремо ми проводимо ще і саміт уповноважених з прав людини, які також говорять про питання професійно щодо забезпечення прав людини на окупованих територіях. І тому дуже важливо, що вже втретє ми підтримуємо цю традицію. І втретє саме експерти знаходяться тут, і експерти приймають дуже важливі рішення в дуже серйозних дискусіях. Ми, політики, ми повинні дослухатись до експертів. Ми не можемо формувати свою думку, не маючи щодо неї глибокої експертизи. І тому я ще раз хочу подякувати вам, що ви неухильно, не покладаючи рук, робите свою експертну справу. І задача нас, політиків, робити все для того, щоб ваші результати втілювалися у відповідні політичні результати. Тому ще раз дуже дякую за це запрошення. Бажаю експертному середовищу дуже гарних і плідних дискусій. І дякую, що ви продовжуєте працювати на благо кримсько-татарського народу як частини великого українського народу. Дякую вам. Нехай вам щастить. Спасибі.
So, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your welcoming speech.
Godātā priekšsēdētāja kungs, paldies par jūsu uzrunām. Un ar to noslēdzam ievada vārdus. Pateicamies saviem viesiem par mūsu ekspertu sanāksmes ievadīšanu. Un iesākot diskusijas, vēlamies pateikties Saimai un mūsu kolēģiem, ar kuriem kopīgiem spēkiem esam gatavojuši šo pasākumu. Pateicos Jurim Pēkalim, Saeimas priekšsēdētājs ārlietu padomnieks, Leldei Rāfeldei, Saeimas administrācijas vadītāji Kālim Buskovskim un Sintijai Brokai no Latvijas Ārlietu institūta un Inesei Vaivadei, Latvijas sadarbības platforma attīstības sadarbībai un visiem ekspertiem, kas ir piedalījušies šīs sanāksmes rīkošanā, un vēlos arī atzīmēt, ka ekspertu diskusija tiek raidīta tiešraidē, un tagad esam gatavi sākt pirmo diskusiju. Taisnīgums, starptautisko noziegumu.
I am pleased to invite to the stage Nariman Celal, the first deputy of the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, a former political prisoner. Please, Nariman, please sit. Kristin Lidze, legislation and international law advisor to the President of Latvia. Please, welcome. Nadia Volkova, the president of the Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group. Welcome, Nadia. Tamila Tasheva, the permanent representative of the president of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Tamila. Darina Pidhorna, the lawyer at the Regional Center for Human Rights. And Cynthia Broka, the deputy director and head of the Middle East Research Program at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. So Cynthia will moderate the discussion, and I'd like to pass the floor to you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Riga, who are arrived here for us. First of all, of course, on behalf of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, it is a great honor for us to participate in this expert platform. Thank you for invitation and thank you for cooperation, of course. And me personally, of course, it is honor to be here and to moderate that a distinguished panel with experts with you today on the critical discussion actually on the pursuit of international justice in response to the unprovoked and
paneli, kurā diskutēsim par Krievijas neizprovocēto agresiju pret Ukrainu. Šis karš ir radis milzu ciešanas ne tikai kara cietušajiem, bet arī milzīgus starptautisko tiesību pārkāpumus, kāda Eiropā vēl nav pieredzēti. Pasaulē, dzīvojot šajos kara apstākļos, viens no galvenajiem uzdevumiem demokrātiskām valstīm ir nodrošināt atbildību par smagajiem starptautiskiem noziegumiem, kas pastrādāti. Un taisnīgums cietušajiem ir ne tikai svarīgs mieram un stabilitātei Ukrainā, bet arī, lai novērstu šādu zvērību atkārtošanos nākotnē. Šī nepieciešamība nodrošināt taisnīgumu ir centrāls elements prezidenta Zelenska piedāvātajā miera formulā, kas tika prezentēta jau 22. gadā. Tolaika prezidents iezīmēja miera formulu, kurā tiek sodīta agresija, aizsargāta dzīvība, atjaunota drošība un teritoriālā integritāte, garantēta drošība un uzsvērts.
We have seen a wave of significant efforts across the globe aimed at holding criminals accountable. And today's panel will explore exactly those efforts, whether they have brought us any closer to justice for Ukraine, and as well as we will dig into the role that democratic countries and international organizations play to achieving this goal. And for that, I have extremely distinguished and exceptional individuals joined here that was already introduced, whose personal and also professional experience will help us to answer all those difficult but nevertheless very critical questions. So we will start with a short opening statement for our guests. Each of you are welcome to take up to 5 minutes to express your thoughts, your message that you have brought with us here to Riga, to our expert community, followed by a brief discussion, and then we will turn to the audience for the question and answer session. I know we have some technical challenges. Some of our guests will leave a bit earlier, but nevertheless, the discussion will continue. So I'll stop here and I'll ask first Mrs. Tamia Tasheva to start. Your thoughts, your message that you want to share with us here today, please.
Thank you. First of all, we really appreciate for all support from Latvia with organizing this really brilliant summit, Parliament Summit of Crimean Platform, and of course this expert discussion. And of course, we also appreciate for our colleagues from expert community, expert network of Crimean Platform for organizing such important event. And I'm absolutely agree with His Excellency Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk. He mentioned that at Crimean Platform we have 3 dimensions. One of them is expert dimension, and each year of Parliament Summits of Crimean Platform we organize such kind expert discussion. I start from maybe very beginning, and we really understand if we now during Crimean Platform Summit discussed issue of human rights also and issue of accountability. War started in 2014 and all crimes against our people started from 2014. All these crimes against our civilian population or crimes against our cultural heritage, for example, ecological problems in Crimea started in 2014, and Russia used Crimea as a playbook actually for occupying another temporary occupied territories. What we see in Ukraine, in the mainland of Ukraine, and crimes of Russia after 2022, the same absolutely methods, the same absolutely playbooks they use in 2014 with abduction Ukrainian children. Actually, abduction of Ukrainian children started in 2014 and 2015. Tortures of people on different shelters, for example, started at the spring 2014 in Crimea with the kidnapping, for example, of Rishat Ametov, a Crimean Tatar activist who resist against Russian occupation and Russian invasion. When we say about illegal transferring civil population, what Russia do, they from one hand they illegally transferred Russian population to Crimea, at another hand they do a lot of issue with the persecution of our people when our people had to flee Crimea to mainland of Ukraine or to third countries, especially after 2022. We see enforced disappearances of our people, Crimean Tatars, so Ukrainians started also in 2014. And unfortunately, if we do not stop Russia after beginning of such kind full-scale invasion, and if we do not stop Russia in Ukraine, they of course start to their invasion operation and to persecute rights of people who live in Western European countries or Eastern European countries, and we unfortunately must understand it. Also, maybe I say a few words about new tendencies in Crimea, which is happened after full-scale invasion, but because my colleagues, experts, maybe say a few words also about the situation in Crimea in 2014 and after. After full-scale invasion, we see how human rights abuses grown up, but even after all this persecution, during 8 years or 10 years, our people continue to resist. And it's really very amazing. And we see how this resistance very related to action of our armed forces, actually. When our military forces do different asymmetric actions on Russian military bases in Crimea, or they withdraw Russian Black Sea Fleet, even without our own Ukrainian Black Sea Fleet from Black Sea and Azov Sea, our people resist in Crimea. What they do, and actually it's really amazing. People raise Ukrainian flag, women do yellow and blue manicure on the hands, or they sing in Ukrainian songs. After that, all these people, and it's more than 1,000 only official data from Russian occupying court, but we understand that it's top of iceberg of such kind resistance in Crimea. After that, Russian occupation authorities start to persecute all these people according to Russian administrative law. It's discrediting of Russian armed forces. And we really understand that even when people understand that they could be punished, they do this amazing and bravery resistance in Crimea. And when we hear this narrative about mostly people in Crimea, they support Russia, it's absolutely not true. Because people in Crimea, they resist against the war and occupation. Even if understand that they could be punished, they resist. Unfortunately, we have more than 218 politically motivated criminal persecutions. And one was a prominent example, it's Nariman Jalal, and we're really happy that he released now and now served as a person who very actively advocate issue of Crimea and releasing of Ukrainian hostages. It's amazing and bravery people, and we must understand that we need to support. And only with deoccupation we could stop these abuses against our Ukrainian people. Only when we deoccupy territory of Crimea, all these persecutions against Ukrainians and Crimean Tatar people, against Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian identity, which is Russia try clean up and erase this identity, will be stopped. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this very painful information, but that is something that we all have to be aware of. I wanted to follow up immediately, considering the topic of today's panel. Can you briefly guide us through the steps that you have already been taken towards international law mechanisms, how you are approaching International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, how you are cooperating with the government, and how far are we? I mean, what are the today's agenda in this regard?
Actually, mostly my institution we work with the issue of reintegration processes and policies which we are prepared. Maybe my colleagues from human rights organizations, they tell a little bit about communications with the International Criminal Court. I have my own background as a human rights defender, and I worked before 2019 in a Crimean human rights organization, and we of course send a lot of information for International Criminal Court. Actually, ICC and work a lot with our institutions, for example, Office of Prosecutor General, of course. They work a lot with the human rights organizations. We establish now, not yet established, but we try to establish a tribunal against Russia, and it's an important step which is adopted on the level of different parliaments or states in different countries all over the world, actually. And of course, only with united, only with such kind of collaboration between expert community, Ukrainian states in abroad in different countries, and of course international organization, we could raise this issue.
Thank you very much. That is exactly why we are here today, right? I move forward to Mrs. Darnia Pithorna to give your brief insight, and if you can also tackle the current state of affairs when it comes to agenda towards international institutions, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. I'm sorry, technical moments. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for having me here. What I'm gonna actually to talk about is another part of the justice story, because justice is so complex that it covers not only trials and giving like verdicts to perpetrators and giving some reparations to victims. It has another side of story when we are talking about reintegration, and Tamila already started to talk about it very briefly. And what I see nowadays, even with all these submissions and different addresses that we are having to different institutions like European Court for Human Rights or to the International Criminal Court or any other institutions that can provide some judicial help or some decision for victims and witnesses of the crimes. It's a long process. It takes a lot of emotions, resources, and a lot of patience from both sides, as like sides of human rights protectors, but also from the side of the victims and witnesses. And for them, the story is just a beginning. And even if they will receive some, I don't know, like some decision from the court, for them, justice is not ended, because they wanted to feel more secured and they want to feel stability in their own lives. They want to feel some social preferences, some financial backgrounds they can rely on, and to live peacefully afterwards, after the conflict will end and after everything will be more or less peaceful for them. And actually in that step, I want to mention very briefly some things that we should talk about a long time ago, but somehow we didn't consider it as important as nowadays, and that's great that we are already talking about on such level. What I mean is that we have in occupied Crimea, we have people who were living under occupying power for so long time, for 10 years already. They were living under propaganda issues. They were converted in some people who follow Russian narratives, who follow some Russian ideas, or who were forced to follow these ideas because they wanted to survive solely. And we have another category of people who are living under Ukraine or who moved abroad and have their own fight abroad somewhere in European countries or any other country. And when the conflict will end, those three categories of people will meet somehow in the Ukraine when they wanted to live under one country, under one regime, under one law. And the issue here is that from the justice side, we need to make sure that all of them will live peacefully without any complex situations or discussions, considering, I don't know, justice side, considering reparation side, considering memorialization policies for each of these categories. Because for people who are living in Ukraine right now under Ukrainian power, for us, the justice and the memory policy is a different story than for people who are living under occupation. For them, it's more important to feel security, to feel social benefits. For us, it's more important to feel that this story of the war, of the conflict, will be incorporated not only in Ukrainian history, but also in European and world history, and that in the future there will be no repetition of such conflict ever. And our justice is different. It's a question for the governments and for civil society to consider how to comply with all of these issues in one moment for a long time. Another thing that we already see it is happening right now is the children who already being transferred from the occupied territories back to Ukraine, thanks a lot to different organizations like Save Ukraine, on Voices of Children, to the Ombudsman Office, and at other organizations who take part in it. But what we see, the children who came from Russian occupation, who came from Russian propaganda narratives, they already have some shifts in minds that already talk to us that they are different children than they were before the occupation, before the conflict. And right now we feel that sometimes these children appeared in society that tend to stigmatize them, to marginalize, to segregate these children because they are different, because they are considered not as Ukrainian children, but those children who came from the Russian narratives. And it's problems that right now on the state level we have no policy that can integrate these children back into Ukrainian society or in society in general. There is no psychological help that provided for these children in more systematic and more reliable way. And it's only a talk about 300 children, and we have yet to consider it of returning about 1,000 and thousands of children back to Ukraine who will be the future of our country and future of the stability and peace in the region in general. Another thing that I want to mention very briefly is a talk about soldiers who are taking right now part in defense of Ukraine against Russia attacks. It's a problem that we still have also no policy on a state level that considering their reintegration back to society, because we have some private initiatives, we have some small grants granting them some psychological help or physical restoration, but it's not the end of the story, because if we will not consider this program, which is called typically DDR, disarmament, reintegration back of soldiers back into society in a civil life, in a peaceful life, we will happen to be in a situation when we will see a new conflict arising in Ukrainian society, which will strike stability and security in countries, stability and security in regions, stability and security once again in the world. And surely we do not want to happen it once again. And in the end of the story, I already mentioned this policy, it's memorialization policies, and I want to highlight them once more again, because Russia have a great culture, informational policy built in occupied territories. We see that it's succeeded in these 10 years. We see that narratives are so huge and so impossible to overcome in like small steps, or kind of that we surely will be in a situation when in the process of the deoccupation and even after the deoccupation, we will struggle to decide what to do with the memory of the peninsula, what to do with the memory of the war, what to do with the memory of the people who were victims or witnesses of the crimes, who were considered, who they want to silence the war, or they want to highlight the war, what they want to do with it. And for them, justice might be a little bit different. For some of them, they wanted their story to be told. For some of them, the story wanted to be muted because for them, silence is the best justice they can get for them in their personal life. For other people, to be told in the public all over the world their story is another part of justice. And we should consider these policies already right now. And it's only a political will, and it's only a political strategy that can shift this paradigm, that can shift this structure. And our expert network, we're eager to help them. We're eager to help states to consider these policies, to make this policy more victim-centered, to be more like very structured, and to be more about victims, witnesses, about people in general, rather than about perpetrators, which is also another part of the story, because perpetrators will back in society after they will suffer the punishment or whatever, or will not suffer the punishment, which is another question of the justice and how to live with the justice decisions in the future. And I stop here because I can talk a lot about it, and it's something that pains me a lot, and I want that not me, not my colleagues talk about it, but everyone talks about it, and everyone thinks and makes some strategies and plans for the future, because what is happening in Crimea, in Ukraine in general, definitely affects not only our Black Sea Azov region, but all the world, and we see it through different perspectives, through different spheres of our everyday life.
Thank you very much. I will also briefly follow. You mentioned a couple of obstacles, of a couple of challenges that you are facing on your daily work when you are advocating for victims in Crimea and in Ukraine. So how we can help you, how Latvia, how closest like-minded countries can help you today, tomorrow, not thinking probably in a long-term scenario, but starting from the short term. What do you expect from us?
Well, actually, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, they have experience of dealing with the Russia propaganda, with the Russian informational policy, with the Russian occupation, and I see how. Actually, I was yesterday in Museum of Riga Ghetto in the Second World War, and I'm used about how you constructed the memory in the museum exposition, how you presented your painful memories that you suffered, that you overcome somehow in such perspective. And maybe your experience of what you already suffered, maybe your consultations can help us to understand how to deal with our problems, on how to bring some peace and stability, not only to personal each of us, but also to some future which consider about how we will tell what was this conflict about, and how will we consider all the events that happened inside of it and after it. Because there is a question on what to do with, I don't know, like cemeteries that constructed out of graves of soldiers who died in so-called SVO. Because for people who were their relatives in Crimea, these graves are important memory of their soldiers who died already. But for us, they are like perpetrators. They invaded us, they killed us, and kind of for us, the justice will be to destroy these cemeteries, but for other people is not. And it's question, and I think that those countries, not only like Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, but also Czech Republic, Serbia, other countries who were under Soviet regime occupation and who overcome this occupation and who consider it about the policies, how to remember, can help us to construct our own policies with different consultations or giving some advices on how to do it.
Thank you very much. I'm quite certain that we can do, and we will do our best. But okay, we move forward to Mr. Nariman Jalal to share your message that you have brought to us, and probably you already want to reflect on something that you have already heard.
Дякую вам за можливість звернутися до вас.
I very thank you for possibility to talk to you.
Як ви знаєте, я маю особистий досвід перебування в російській в'язниці, і тому дуже важливо розуміння того, що беззаконня, яке чинить Росія, воно відбувається і після того, як людина опиняється за ґратами.
As you know, from my personal experience, I was in detention in Russia, and it's very important for us to talk about what is happening with a person in detention.
Навіть після того, як людина отримала вирок, абсолютно несправедливий, по сфабрикованій справі, вона має ще витримати дуже довгий строк і пройти через важкі випробування.
After the person had a court decision, it's very hard for this person to stay in detention and to pass through all this human rights violation what is happening in colonies.
Тобто з винесенням судового рішення злочин, який вчиняє Російська Федерація до конкретної людини на окупованій території, не завершується, він триває і далі.
After the court decision, human rights violation, it's not the end for this person. And when person is in a colony or pretrial detention center, this person should stay strong inside.
І тому ми маємо приділяти дуже велику увагу тому, що відбувається в російських колоніях, таборах, тюрмах з нашими громадянами, які абсолютно незаконно утримуються там.
So that is why it's very important to pay attention what is happening in pretrial detention centers and penal colonies in occupied Crimea and on territory of Russia.
І тому як російська держава в цілому, так і кожна конкретна людина, яка порушує права людей в в'язницях, вона має понести відповідальність.
And that is why Russia in general and every person who involved in persecutions of civilians should be punished.
І тому нам потрібно зайнятися і займатися збиранням інформації про те, хто чинить такі злочини, хто чинить тортури і жорстоко поводиться з ув'язненими українськими полоненими та в'язнями.
That is why we should collect information about persecutors and to punish all these people who were involved in tortures and human rights violations of civilians, hostages and prisoners of war.
На жаль, Росія закриває доступ до наших політв'язнів, цивільних в полоні, військовополонених, і це дуже важка справа збирати такі докази.
Unfortunately, Russia refused to get access to our civilian hostages and to collect information about them and to get this information.
На жаль, єдина організація, яка б могла б виконати цю функцію, це Міжнародна організація Червоного Хреста, також не доглотає повних зусиль задля того, щоб потрапити до наших полонених та ув'язнених.
Only one organization in the world, this is organization International Red Cross, which can get access to our civilian hostages and prisoners of the war, but they don't have this access.
Тому нам треба об'єднувати зусилля задля того, щоб змусити ці міжнародні організації, які мають мандат на виконання подібних функцій, виконали їх.
So only together with our together work we can press on this organization who have this possibility to collect information and to get access to our people.
Я дуже задоволений тим, що багато українських правозахисних організацій вже почали, і державних органів вже почали збирати інформацію про конкретних посадових осіб, суддів, прокурорів, слідчих, але треба не забувати про виконавців у в'язниці, які вчиняють подібні злочини.
That's very great that already Ukrainian human rights organization and some international organizations, they started to collect this information for judges, FSB officers, persecutors, and try to do something with that.
Саме відчуття безкарності робить їх особливо жорстокими.
When they feel that they will be not punished, they can do more crimes.
Ми ж маємо довести їм, що вони обов'язково понесуть відповідальність. Справа в тому, що ми зараз стикаємося з таким наративом, що відповідати буде лише верхівка російської влади. Але ми маємо розуміти, що відповідальність мають понести і всі виконавці.
We understand that all these persecutors should be punished, and we should show them this because we see the narrative that only Russian government will be punished.
Тому наша позиція має бути дуже чіткою. Відповідальність має бути як російської держави в цілому, так і персональна відповідальність кожного, хто вчинив злочин проти українських громадян.
That is why our position should be very definitely and to say to everybody that not only Russian government should be punished, but also individuals.
Однако перед нами стоит еще одна важная задача. На оккупированных территориях есть категория людей, которые не подпадают прямо под ответственность за их действия. Это люди, которые способствуют осуществлению различных преступлений. Добре. Я вже переходжу так. У нас є особлива категорія людей, які не вчиняють безпосередньо злочини, але вони допомагають, щоб ці злочини відбувалися.
We have also one category of people who are not directly involved in these crimes, but they help to do these crimes.
Це журналісти, блогери, різні пропагандисти, люди, які закликають до вчинення злочинів, до переслідування громадян на окупованих територіях і підтримують пропаганду в свідомості наших громадян на окупованих територіях.
Those people are bloggers, journalists, and everybody who try to spread Russian propaganda. And they call other people to support human rights violations and persecutions of our citizens.
Тому нам треба рухатися, як щонайменше, в двох напрямках. Треба вдосконалювати механізми реалізації міжнародного права. І це по-перше. А по-друге, звичайно, ми маємо здобути політичну волю. Це найголовніше, і я радий, що такі заходи, як Кримська платформа, саме сприяють консолідації нашої спільної політичної волі на застосування норм міжнародного права проти агресора.
So we have two directions. First is to cooperate and work on international human rights and humanitarian law and other mechanisms. And second one is to have political will. And it's very great that such events like Crimean platform can help to achieve this point.
На жаль, ми часто стикаємося з тим, що навіть маючи відповідні міжнародні норми для того, щоб притягти злочинця до відповідальності, ми не маємо волі на виконання цієї норми. Тому нам треба об'єднатися і зрозуміти, що безвідповідальність, вона породжує нові злочини.
Despite that, we have different international law and international mechanism, but sometimes, unfortunately, we doesn't have this will to do that, and
добре. І після сьогоднішнього пленарного засідання я маю дуже позитивне відчуття, що цього разу нам вдасться консолідувати наші політичні зусилля при застосуванні міжнародного права до агресора Російської Федерації.
And after today's plenary session, I feel very positive that only with our cooperation we can have this political will and to make this international cooperation.
Дякую за увагу.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for really indicating several important aspects, but too I noted down really the need for political will in achieving those goals, because international mechanisms are there. We just need to have the political will, and also the question when it comes to access to evidence. This is also something that we have to keep in mind. I know you have to run, so I will pass the mic to you, and then we will continue.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I really have some rush up, but also I wanted to just add to more details, like talking about justice is not talking about punishment, is not about talking about creating trials like tribunal for Putin. It's not about ICC trial or UN court or whatever trial we consider as the best option for us. It's also about victims, and actually I forgot to mention it during my speech, but considering the reparations for Crimean people and considering the great registry of damage that was initiated by Council of Europe, and unfortunately, this registry for damage is only for the events that happened after the 2022. It's not considering the events happening before the full-scale invasion, which might feel for Crimean people as some, I don't know, like isolation, marginalization, like their crimes are not important to communities, their crimes are not important to governments, their crimes are something that should be muted and should be not considered as something very important for them. But for Crimeans and for whole Ukrainian society and for those who suffer the crimes, it is important to feel that we care about them, and we need to change this story. We need to make this change that we need to register damage since 2014, because that's when the war started, Russian against Ukraine, and that's when we need to collect all the dramas, all the stories, all the suffers that we have in our history right now. And that's when we need to start to calculate the reparations and all these financial and moral things that we need to compensate and like relive after the conflict will end, or even during it.
Thank you very much. Have a safe flight home, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon, and hopefully seeing some really good results from the work you're doing. Thank you very much. But we will proceed, and I'm turning to Ms. Leeds to ask your observations and thoughts from everything you heard up until now, and also, of course, highlighting what democratic nations, especially Latvia, already are doing in this specific situation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. I have noted down 3 points that I would like to share, but for introduction, perhaps a very brief description why I'm so involved in all these questions is that until the July of 2023, I was legal advisor at the Foreign Ministry of Latvia, and my daily job consisted of dealing with legal issues arising from war in Ukraine and against Ukraine, from sanctions to individual responsibility of criminals before the International Criminal Court, perhaps creation of a new tribunal for the crime of aggression. So this is my background, and I will to some extent use that background to illustrate Latvia's approach to the legal aspects arising from Russia's invasion into Ukraine. As I said, I have 3 points, and my first point is about the nature of international law. It's always very tempting to compare international law with national law. We're used to national law systems that are very centralized, that are very vertical. We know that there's a police force which is authorized to use force to make sure that the decisions of the courts are executed, that criminals are stopped. Nothing like that exists in international law. International law is very decentralized, and states themselves create rules for them and also make sure that these rules are observed and violations of those rules are punished. You rightly mentioned that all of that depends on the political will of the states. So this, I think, is something that needs to be remembered, that international law is as effective as the states are willing it to be. At the same time, international law does have plenty of mechanisms to address violations of international law and to make sure that we have comprehensive accountability to ensure comprehensive justice. And by that I mean accountability by Russia as a state and criminal liability of individuals that are guilty of crimes, including international crimes. And same goes for justice. There needs to be a justice for Ukraine as a state, but also justice for individual victims. So that's my first point, that international law is specific, but it does have mechanisms, and it's up to the states to use those mechanisms. My second point is something that I repeat as often as I can, and that is the fact that Ukraine has shown remarkable skill in using those mechanisms. Already in 2014, Ukraine initiated all possible legal proceedings that were available to it, from International Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights, the mechanisms under law of the sea regarding the situation in the Black Sea. So Ukraine showed these mechanisms exist, that they are relevant, and that they can be used. Same goes for actions after the full-scale invasion in 2022. Again, International Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights, International Criminal Court, the whole spectrum of mechanisms have been triggered, have been used to show that they are relevant, and also to illustrate very clearly that what Russia has done, it has created existential threats to rules-based international order, and there needs to be rules-based mechanisms to address that, of course, in addition to all possible military support that we can offer to Ukraine. And my third point is that together with our Ukrainian colleagues, the democratic states have worked, I hope, to the best of our abilities to assist Ukraine in using those mechanisms, but we have also identified what I would call gaps in those mechanisms. And two things I would like to highlight particularly. First of all, crime of aggression. The International Criminal Tribunal is a standing criminal court. It's unique in its nature and its scope, but it does not have jurisdiction over Russia, specifically over crime of aggression. We've heard that the International Criminal Court has taken an unprecedented step and issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin for suspected war crimes. That is a very bold and very right step from the International Criminal Court, but unfortunately, as the statutes of this court are written now, it cannot exercise jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, which is a major fault, because crime of aggression is a source for all other crimes in the territory of Ukraine, crime against humanity, war crimes, including genocide. So crime of aggression needs to be addressed. And that is one of the most heated discussions currently in various formats, how to establish a new tribunal to specifically address crime of aggression. Baltic states, including Latvia, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Poland, Czech Republic, have been very vocal and strong supporters for the strongest possible international tribunal, that it has legitimacy to prosecute also what is called the Troika, the three highest officials of Russia that normally would enjoy immunity against international prosecution, but this needs to be solved. So that is one element that has arisen in the discussions on accountability, crime of aggression, that needs to be addressed. The second question that was just mentioned by our colleague is a register of damages, created in the Council of Europe to collect information about damages caused to Ukraine as a state, to local governments, to enterprises, but more importantly to individuals by crimes committed by Russia. The whole spectrum of crimes, from murders and disappearances to the destruction of property and other crimes. And that is a very important, again, and valuable step to document those damages and to prepare a ground for future compensation mechanisms. I hope that in these 3 points I have illustrated that there are tools offered by international law that states can use. And to conclude this brief introduction, to answer your question, what democratic states can do, democratic states cannot give up. We don't have a luxury to get tired, to stop pushing for all these reforms. Our Speaker of the Parliament in the introductory statement to this panel discussion referred to history of Latvia, and I can only agree that our history is the reason why we take so personally what is happening in Ukraine. The Baltic states did not see justice after they were occupied by the Soviet Union, and we are absolutely adamant that that same will not happen to Ukraine, that there will be justice for Ukraine. And as other colleagues already mentioned, justice is absolutely indispensable for sustainable peace, because impunity for crimes brings repetition. In other words, if these crimes are not punished, both at the level of state and individuals, there's a very high risk that they will be repeated. And that's something we simply cannot afford. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just also a brief follow-up regarding the criminal tribunal and the development of that. I know we've been a huge part of that since the beginning of the talks about that. How far are we? What is the current agenda on that? What is still missing that we can launch the tribunal to working?
Later this year, in November, Riga will host a meeting of the core group. That is a format of, I think, around 60 states, debating the formats and the substance of the tribunal. I think the first success, if I could put it that way, is that it's been a while that we are no longer talking whether to create a tribunal, we're talking how to create a tribunal. And that was not the case in early 2022. There were plenty of reservations about new mechanism that might undermine international criminal court. So that is a first hurdle that we have overcome. There is a general understanding that there needs to be a tribunal specifically for the crime of aggression. There are plenty of complex legal issues that need to be solved. Most importantly, the question of immunities. It is a very strong position of Latvia and other Baltic states that this tribunal needs to be able to try the highest leadership of Russia. Otherwise, there's very little added value to the new tribunal. We've heard very interesting and very legal discussions about that, about whether there is precedent or there isn't any precedent. We are convinced that international community is sufficiently creative when it needs to resolve a specific question. The fact that identical tribunal has never been established is not a proof that it cannot be done. Nuremberg Tribunal was also without a precedent. International Criminal Court is without a precedent. So I'm confident that if there's a political will, the tribunal will be there.
Thank you. And now last but not least, Ms. Volkova, please share your thoughts and reflections on the things that you have already heard today.
Good afternoon. Yesterday when I arrived really late at night. I was really exhausted and I couldn't fall asleep, so I started channel surfing on TV, which I never usually do because I don't have a TV at my house. And what really struck me, sleep didn't arrive, by the way. I was really more awakened by the news, and the news was, as I switched channels, everywhere on the news hour, Russia featured prominently. And the way it featured was that it was participating in the conflicts in the world. That was basically the main news about it. Ukraine was also mentioned several times, Iran, then the BRICS summit, then the Israel-Palestine situation and the role of Russia in the war with Lebanon and so forth. And that got me thinking. So we are here today, and actually I wanted to thank Latvia for hosting the Crimean Platform Summit, and thank you so much for the invitation. There is a certain symbolism, and the Crimean Platform is a symbol for me, really, of the fight that is not ceasing, despite Russia trying to plunge the world into the abyss of darkness. And as long as we are having these discussions like the one here today, I think we have a good chance of winning and not, being subjected to the actions that Russia has been perpetrating for over 10 years against Ukraine. I'm sure there are countries that can share their experiences in how Russia has been divisive, how it's been oppressive, how it's been aggressive towards them. But obviously we are from Ukraine and our experience is our experience, and we are very thankful again to all our supporters for standing with us, standing united in this fight and in solidarity, because I think the goal and the mission of the Crimean Platform of returning Crimea, reintegrating Crimea and deoccupying Crimea where it belongs is one of the most important and essential goals to demonstrate to the world that we are not accepting any other terms except for the right democratic ones that we want to live by. I'm in a privileged position, obviously, having heard the interventions from my fellow panelists. I get a chance to reflect on them, and I agree with all the statements and suggestions that have been made. I would like to start with Tamila and how she outlined for us, and also Mr. Nariman Jalal and his experience of how Russia has been perpetrating the crimes in Crimea, and also how they use that experience to extrapolate it onto other occupied territories. I wanted, because our organization has been focusing on trying to ensure meaningful justice for the victims of the armed conflict in Ukraine. I think we've been engaging a lot with different authorities, including the investigative authorities and the Office of the Prosecutor General and the regional offices. And here I would like to note the great work that has been done over the 10 years by the Crimean Prosecutor's Office, because I think they were the first ones to face these challenges of prosecuting armed conflict-related crimes in the conditions that many of the offices are operating now where they don't have access to the territories, they don't have lawyers hardly ever get access to the victims to collect the testimonies, to get their statements. It's been a great challenge, and I think Ukraine's experience is unique in that sense, because I don't think there are many states in the world that can demonstrate such vigor for, a motivation for investigating the crimes while they are ongoing during the full-scale invasion as well. I also wanted to reflect on the work of the national courts. They have been trying the best they can, but again, I agree with the statement that the international law is as powerful and the international mechanisms are as powerful as the domestic systems make them to be, and also the experience and the best practices that we feed into international law institutions, they do come from the ground. We see many challenges for Ukraine in that regard, because while we are grappling obviously with the biggest armed conflict since the Second World War in the territory of Europe, but also we are trying to do the best we can to administer justice while the armed conflict is ongoing. Obviously, we need all the support that we can, and while we've been very good at activating the international mechanisms that are available, they've already been mentioned several times, the ICC, the ICJ, the UN mechanisms as well, and the European Court of Human Rights, although since September 16, 2022, it is no longer available to us as a very effective mechanism. We're still getting the decisions from the previous period of 2014 to 2022, which are obviously going to form the basis for the precedents for, and the guidance as well for our courts in particular. But I think what we've been the challenges that we've been identifying is that although there are many mechanisms that have been activated, the level of coordination has not been the best. The dynamic has been very active, but obviously there are different issues that are still need solving. When we're talking about, for example, the ICC, and then obviously the talk and the discussions, active discussions of setting up the special tribunal of a crime of aggression, I think there are still obviously the immediate challenges of the immunities that have been mentioned. The definition of the crime of aggression as well is one of the challenges, how we define it in the context of the tribunal, whether it's going to be a Ukrainian definition of the crime of aggression, or we're going to align it with the ICC definition of the crime of aggression remains to be solved. I think it is also very important to identify how the perpetrators are going to be, while there is obviously the talk of the tribunal being able to prosecute the Troika. At the same time, the ICC, they've already issued the arrest warrants against the president of the Russian Federation and top military commanders, some of them already. So these issues remain to be solved. When we're talking about joint investigative teams, I think there are certain challenges there as well, and they sort of both at the domestic level, but also international, because it remains to be seen how the evidence that has been collected already and will continue to be collected by the states that are members of the JIT will be used, and by which institutions or authorities they will be used. In terms of the UN mechanisms, they are also quite limited in their capacity. We can also only bring so many cases to the UN Human Rights Committee, but also there is a question of universal jurisdiction. That mechanism has been activated and has been, there has been an active talk that many states with universal jurisdiction are willing to prosecute crimes committed in the territory of Ukraine. However, the the practical reality is that many of the states that do have experience in prosecuting such crimes in Syria, in Iraq, for instance, they do have limited capacity as well and limited resources. So the big bulk of the crimes that will have to be prosecuted, they will have to be prosecuted domestically. And our system is overwhelmed. As you all know, the statistics obviously, there are over 130,000 crimes that have already been investigations open, and we keep counting, of course, because the aggression is ongoing. Obviously, there have been a lot of resources invested into the domestic system, but still there are many, many issues and challenges from the legislative perspective, from the perspective of infrastructure, and also resources remain to be solved. I'm going to stop here. I'm aware of the time. We only have 10 minutes left, so I'll probably pass it on to the audience.
Thank you very much. I've been briefed that we can take a bit more time, so we have some time, but nevertheless, I'm turning to the audience for your questions and answers. Please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and indicate to which panelist you are addressing the question. Yeah, there's a hand. The colleagues will share the mic.
Thank you for a very broad perspective on the issues. My name is Hamid Lajavardi, American Baltic Investments. After the invasion of Ukraine, there developed a competition between the axis, let's say, of evil and the alliance, which would be the Western Europeans and some Southeastern countries. What is puzzling me is that in this competition, of which the information plays a major part, information war, the Russians are trying to portray the West as colonialist, expansionist power, and that has the greatest effect on the global South, which they're really trying to bring in. However, the reality is that Russia is the last colonial expansionist power in the world. To give you a number, say in 1300, Russia, what was considered as Russia at that time, 20,000 square kilometers. 100 years later, 220,000 kilometers. By the time Ivan the Terrible came to power, it was around 5 million kilometers. And today it's about 18,000 kilometers. According to the information I received from diplomats and think tanks, the global South has no clue as to the imperialist and colonial nature today of Russia. Why isn't the West being more proactive in spreading that message?
Thank you, sir. Who wants to take this?
I perhaps can start to answer this question. You're absolutely right that outreach is indispensable part of our efforts, and I personally have been involved in these outreach efforts, and all my colleagues in other Baltic states and European Union, Council of Europe. And the point that you mentioned is exactly the point that resonates with our colleagues in all regions of the world, that Russia is trying to change borders by force, and that is the return of a colonial powers and ambitions. And that is something that really strikes the nerve and illustrates how what is happening in Ukraine is not a regional issue, it's a global issue. And again, I can reiterate what I said before, we keep doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your excellent question. And actually we, as a state institution, work a lot with the countries of Global South, and last year we organized conference, Crimea Global Understanding Ukraine Through the South. Why this title of conference and why we organize it? Because Crimea is a very unique place, very diverse. We have in Crimea different nationalities, ethnic groups, national minorities or indigenous population, and also it's a huge Muslim community. That is why we use somehow this Crimea perspective when we communicate with the countries of Global South. And actually during this summit, parliamentary summit or summit of the heads of the state, we involve different countries from so-called Global South. It's Southeastern Asia, African continent, Persian Gulf, or Latin America. It's really very important. And when we communicate with all these countries, all these continents, well, we always mention that Russia really only one, maybe, now colonial power in the world, and they very actively, unfortunately, colonize even at this time our territories. And Crimea also, why we also communicated, because Crimea is a very good example of such kind colonial policy. When we speak with different academia or even journalists or even with some politician, even Western politician, but on the closed doors, of course, we see the narrative and hear the narrative about Crimea is a very difficult case, very another case, because Crimea is always Russia. It's really totally not true, because before 1783, before Catherine II destroyed Crimean Tatar Khanate, it's a state, Crimean Tatar state in Crimea. Majority population in Crimea was a Crimean Tatar people. It's a near 90%. When Russia started the colonization processes in Crimea, they start to transfer it illegally, Crimean Tatar population pushed out from Crimea, and at another hand they transferred Russian population from different parts of Russian Empire. They do this settlement colonization of Crimean Peninsula. What they do actually also against all Ukraine, if we say about newly captured territories in Donbas region, even in Zaporizhzhia region, in Kherson region, what they do at first hand, they transfer illegally their population to these cities, even to Mariupol, which is absolutely destroyed, and now it's a lot of Russian citizens who came to our lands. And when we communicate with our African colleagues from Southeastern Asia, for example, with Malaysia and Indonesia, we explain it. When all these countries, all these delegates or experts ask us, or journalists, yes, but West also do such kind of crimes. Maybe in a past years, but як покаялись, це забула слово, but they But they regret this crime of colonization. But Russia not. That is why it's absolutely, I totally agree, we need to communicate with countries of Global South very actively, but not only to speak to them, but also to hear what they say. And when you say about also colonization and imperialism from Russia, it's another issue. It's using of hunger as a weapon also. Because when we say about occupying Crimea, why it's really also important? Because if when Russia control Crimea, they also control Black Sea or Azov Sea. Now we are really happy that we withdraw Russian Black Sea fleet from Azov and parts of Black Sea, especially from western coast of Crimea. And now we deblocked our grain corridor for all these countries. But all these countries from Global South, they really understand how it's important issue of security and deblocking Black Sea, Azov Sea, and to deoccupy territory of Crimea, because they need all this grain or and other products for their region. And Crimea, it's not only about Ukraine, it's not only about Europe, it's really global security, food security, military security for all region and for all world.
Thank you very much. Do you want to add something else? No? Okay. Are there any other questions? Yeah, there's a hand on the back.
Thank you so much. Tyyne Karilainen from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you for the very insightful panel. I would like to ask, could you provide us some more concrete scenarios? How could we actually move from only collecting evidence for the war crimes to actually prosecuting them? Like, what steps do we actually need to take, or what political decisions or what events need to happen? It's just for us to actually imagine that kind of end state where we see accountability, because I think, at least for me, it is still unclear, like, how to come from this situation to one where there is more accountability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for joining us, and have a safe flight back home, and stay strong and safe. Thank you. Who wants to take the question? Christine, I'm looking towards you. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to respond in practical terms. International Criminal Court is already investigating war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide. International Criminal Court has well-established procedures. The indictments have been issued. Of course, the question is whether the persons will physically ever appear before International Criminal Court. That again depends on the readiness of the states that are members of the International Criminal Court to cooperate with this court on this matter. As to the crime of aggression, as I mentioned before, at the moment International Criminal Court cannot deal with the crime of aggression. To establish an international tribunal, at least as it currently is envisaged, the states need to agree. First of all, it's a political decision to establish this tribunal, and then most probably it's drafting of a statute based on international agreement. And then once this is established, formally a legal treaty is adopted, then we choose judges, then the legal procedure is launched, again possible indictments based on the evidence collected. I've often hear questions, how can you be sure that this tribunal will be effective? Obviously, if the tribunal is not there, it is not effective. If it is there, we can do our best to make sure that it does have effect. And even if it's only at the level of discussion, I hope it constitutes this sword of Damocles that is there and reminds everyone on a daily basis that these are international crimes. I hope I at least outlined the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to add something?
Yes, I can add. We actually represent victims of grave crimes in Ukraine, and have done so for over 10 years now. And when I said that both levels, domestic and international, have issues, I meant that they do have issues, and the prosecutions of these cases are very much still a challenge for both levels. And in fact, the international system, I mean, domestic system has been at this test, going through this test for many years now. The international system is being tested right now, and we're seeing what opportunities we really have as we sit here that are accessible to the victims, and which are still not accessible, and there still need more work to be done to make them accessible. So from our perspective, whenever we build a case, we take it to the domestic authorities. Obviously, the majority of the cases that are prosecuted domestically, they are prosecuted in absentia because there is no access to the perpetrators in most cases. And this is not ideal in cases of grave crimes. I mean, the opinions are split, of course, but if there are trials in absentia, obviously they need to adhere to the standards of the European Court of Human Rights. And in Ukraine, is still a work in progress. We had the European Court of Human Rights, as I mentioned, available and accessible. It is no longer accessible because of the expulsion of the Russian Federation from the Council of Europe in 2022. Finally, there is a UN and the UN mechanisms, like the Human Rights Committee or Committee of the Rights of the Child, which Russia is not, unfortunately, a party to, but I think the complaints can still be brought under that mechanism, and also CEDAW. But again, these mechanisms, they have, a limited sort of power and authority apart from the committee, Human Rights Committee. So what we have been advocating for is strengthening the domestic system, as I mentioned before, and the way that we would like it strengthened, we would like to integrate an international element. Right now it is happening anyway with all the advisors and different advisory groups and experts coming in and trying to advise Ukraine, but without access to the case files and access to the crime scenes, which makes it challenging. Whereas when there is a mechanism, a domestic mechanism with an international element which is formalized, then it makes the work more coordinated and easily managed in a way. We've seen it on the examples in Bosnia, in Sierra Leone, for instance, and Guatemala, and other mechanisms. And this is something that we would like to happen for Ukraine very much, because we think that the transition from the system of investigating and prosecuting ordinary crimes to the capacity which will allow to prosecute grave crimes would make it a lot easier.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. Are there any hands? If no, so I will shoot my question to you. For recent days, in a recent week, we have been discussing Ukraine's victory plan a lot. We know from what it exists, from some publicly available parts, and then some confidential information, basically covering a lot of aspects regarding the security of Ukraine, economic potential, also Europe's security architecture, and you know it very well. But the question would be, and also thinking about the next panel who will speak about those issues, my question would be, what role does the justice and international law plays in a general victory sense, whether it's under the victory plan or whether it's in a broader perspective? How do you see all those issues that you have been discussing today and presenting here, how they can be used in order to achieve the victory?
Actually, justice included in absolutely and each point of peace formula, which is suggested by President Zelensky in 2022. When we say about civil hostages, for example, it's a fourth point of Ukrainian peace formula, or about returning our Ukrainian children, for example. Or when we say about even withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory, or when we say about ecology in our territory, it's also absolutely all of that. It's about justice. If we say about rights of our people, and I mentioned civil hostages, it's also about returning of rights at this territory. When we say about territorial integrity, and this point, of course, included to the peace formula, it means that we need to return peace and freedoms at our territory, and it could be only after the occupation all our temporary occupied territory. And actually, very important to mention, a few weeks ago we present a poll, social polls in Ukraine, and near 90% of our Ukrainian citizens say that we are ready to wait to that moment when we return all our territories. We do not give up any our Ukrainian territories. And of course, our people, our soldiers, they fight on the battlefield on all our territories. And of course, it's also about justice.
Thank you. Yeah, you want to add?
I think the answer is very straightforward and has been mentioned already by Tamila and other panelists. Sustainable peace is not possible without justice. And I think herein lies the truth. So I think we need to do everything in our power to ensure meaningful justice for the victims, reconciliation processes, reintegration processes, and then we can hope that we will have peace finally.
Thank you. Christine?
I can only agree. Sustainable peace cannot exist without justice, and also using the international law as an instrument to achieve that justice is an unequivocal message from international community that behavior exhibited by Russia is never normalized and never accepted. So again, we're thinking in terms of future prevention, that it can never repeat itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for your participation, for your expertise, and for your work that you are doing on a daily basis. Thank you all for listening in. Now there is time for coffee. Please be back sharply at 5 p.m. as the next panel will start. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will wait for another 1 minute and then to start. I believe as soon as we have a panel dedicated to the security and defense issues, and we have 2 persons with military background, we just delay a few minutes. It's not appropriate. So, my name is Elena Frolova. I'm a deputy chairperson of the Center for Defense Strategies, Ukrainian think tank, which is dealing with security and defense. And I'm coordinating a security group in Crimean Platform Expert Network. And thank you for staying with us for the last panel in Summit. And it's always difficult, and it's always difficult to compete with the coffee and good snacks, but we will try to do so. We are now in just like in some course, I don't want to say in the middle of the war, but in some course of the war, which is constantly changeable. I won't speak about that this is the biggest war from the Second World War, because we all know that, and we are in Latvia who perfectly understands what's going on and how important and how dangerous this war is. But the issue is that the war is constantly changing. Yes, what we saw from the beginning and what we see now, this is like 2 different types of war, with different prognoses and with different expectations, with new dynamics, with new accents added. Lately, we just saw that we are welcoming North Korea in the course of this war, which actually geopolitically changes a lot of things. And today I read the prognosis of IMF, and each year IMF said that we give some kind of prognosis for Ukrainian economy, taking into consideration that this year the war will end up the same prognosis they made for the next year. So, that brings us to the position that, yes, we're here to discuss the Black and Azov Sea security. But there is no security. I mean, it doesn't depend, do we have a war on the ground or do we have a war on the sea? And yes, we have some very good dynamics in Black Sea, which, by the way, is a little bit silent operation for the last period, and we more focused on land operation, what's going on. But we have a future election in United States. We expect in the change of most of commissioners in EU. We discuss a possibility or non-possibility of invitation of Ukraine to NATO. And one of the big issues and one of the big questions we would like to discuss, what are the lessons learned for now on, and what we can do to make really this war as short as possible and as resultative as possible, of course, for Ukraine, but also for European Union and for those countries who are interested in bringing back stability to the region, to the Europe, to the Black and Azov Sea. And I'm so delighted to have those guests who are able to discuss this issue from different angles. First of all, let me introduce to you Viktor Kivlyuk, my colleague from the Center for Defense Strategies, and he is Ukrainian. He has a Ukrainian military background. He is like a colonel, retired, and he did a lot of work participating in the operations in Donbass, and his field of expertise is the development of strategy in the field of national security and defense, mobilization issues, which are a very sensitive point now for Ukraine, and of course national resistance. Alexander Harchenko, he is expert in energy security with more than 20 years of experience, and actually he was like for a long time advisor to different agencies and ministries in Ukraine dealing with energy security and development, and follow up the Ukrainian transition to and connection of Ukrainian system to the European system in the moment when the invasion started. And very often we discuss different energy security issues, including European one, and I hope we will speak about that. And I'm very delighted to welcome here also Jānis Kažuciņš. Sorry for my pronunciation. I tried very, very hard, really. And I think that all the Latvians knows him very well. He is Distinguished Fellow of the Center for Geopolitical Studies in Riga, and former National Security Advisor to the President of Latvia and Secretary of the National Security Council. He was also Director of the Constitution Protection Bureau and Chairman of NATO's Civilian Intelligence Committee. And of course, military background, brigadier in the British Army and OBE. Yes, so very impressive experience, and obviously you can speak about military and geopolitical influence of this war and lessons which we learned from it. So let's speak about the resilience. Let's speak about hybrid component, and let's start probably from observation of how the war operation changes, how the Black Sea region is influenced on stability, and what we have now on the ground. Victor, my question to you.
Thank you. I will speak about lessons, totally military lessons. Maybe we can speak about a very long list of these lessons. In my opinion, most important are 8. All understand what unmanned system is game changer in this war. First, the role of asymmetric means is growing. Aerial and naval unmanned platforms have become key primarily in resource-constrained environments. Ukraine successfully uses drones to attack the Russian fleet and port infrastructure. Such means are relatively cheap but effective, especially against large and technologically complex targets like combat ships. The use of sea mines has once again proven its effectiveness and a tool for controlling waterways and limiting fleet maneuvers. Second, vulnerability of large naval platforms. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, also outnumbered, proved vulnerable of drone strikes, anti-ship missiles, and other means of attack. The loss of the flagship, the Moskva cruiser, to Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missile strike underscored this vulnerability. In large surface ships, in the conditions of the growing threat of airstrikes by anti-ship missiles and UAVs, unmanned means from the surface of the water become less effective in they don't have sufficient protection. Third lesson, integration of various kinds of weapons. The Ukrainian army effectively coordinates the actions of different branches of military. Artillery, aviation, ground troops and drones work in close cooperation to destroy sea and coastal targets. The use of anti-ship missiles and other means of coastal defense, for example, Harpoon and Neptune missiles, allowed Ukraine to create conditions where the conduct of naval amphibious operation became unlikely for the enemy. Fourth, control of critical infrastructure. Control of ports and sea roads remains key in naval warfare. The blockade of Ukrainian ports and disruption of navigation by Russia seriously affected the economy of Ukraine. In response, Ukraine made a successful strike on bases, warehouses and ship repair facilities of the Russian fleet. Critical infrastructure has become a priority for both sides, and the protection of restoration of its elements are crucial for the continuation of hostilities at sea. Fifth, information warfare and intelligence. Information advantage and the use of intelligence data, including satellite and commercial information, have become an important factor for accurate navigation and planning of operation. The use of satellite pictures to adjust strikes on ships and bases has changed the nature of naval battles. Russian electronic warfare efforts have also affected hostilities by attempting to jam communication and control drones. Sixth, hybrid operations. Russia actively uses hybrid methods of warfare at sea, including covert operation, using grey fleet, private military companies, and paramilitary formation to carry out subversive activities. These include the use of small vessels and fishing vessels for reconnaissance and support operations. As a result, there is a constant increase in the need for constant monitoring of maritime borders and protection of trade routes. Seventh, mobility and quick adaptation. Both Ukraine and Russia have shown that mobile forces at sea, including speedboats, small combat units and flexible coastal defense forces, can quickly adapt to changes in enemy tactics. The speed of action and the ability to quickly respond to threats have become important elements of success. Eighth, constant escalation of the conflict. The confrontation at sea is accompanied by constant escalation, especially in the area of strategic sea roads and ports. Each successful Ukrainian strike triggers new countermeasures, underscoring the importance of an effective escalation strategy to achieve military and political goals. In general, naval operations in the Azov and Black Sea region have shown that even under the conditions of the technological superiority of Russia, small and well-organized forces of Ukraine successfully resist aggression using modern asymmetric means and an effective strategy. I need to say, for all who supports Ukraine and Crimean Tatar people in our joint struggle. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to refer a few points which you mentioned, Victor, that you said about the critical infrastructure. Yes, so this is the part, one of the part of the war. It happened to be a very important part of the war. Russian constantly attack the infrastructure. We suffer from the lack of electricity, lack of heating, and this is not only important for Ukrainian population, this is also important for Ukrainian defense, for conducting the successful operation. It happened that we happened to be in this like a very hybrid war so fast that we maybe didn't expect it. And the latest, what was mentioned by the president of Ukraine, that one of the basics for future negotiations can be potentially negotiations on avoiding the critical infrastructure targeting from both sides, Russian and Ukrainian, because Ukraine is also very effective in that. But Sasha, we many times discussed with you that, on your opinion, Europe didn't make lessons learned from Ukrainian infrastructure losses, that Europe is not very well prepared to potential clash with Russia or with other regimes, which include not only direct military targeting, but some kind of subversive activity and all the other. Can you tell about your lessons in that situation? Yeah.
Yeah, very simple. Let's start. I just asking Ukrainians who is the audience, do not answer to my question because I want to start with question to the audience. Guys, let's imagine that electricity is off. What you will do? Any ideas? Please, just hand and answer.
Just wait until the extra generators will start
Good.
working.
You lost electricity for 1 day. You're still in your apartment. You have no mobile connection. You have no internet connection, and you still is out of supply. Please.
I would just listen to the radio on batteries and start my wood burner.
Good idea, and you have wood burn.
Yes. It was a strategic decision because I got my flat 2 years ago, so lessons learned from Ukraine.
Absolutely. Any other ideas? Who has any preparation on this case of situation? Because technically we are in Latvia, and if we have more than 3 people from Latvia here in the room, can you just, who is from Latvia? Okay, thank you. You still synchronized with Russian energy system, with Russian energy grid, and they can switch you off in 10 minutes. Just, they decide and do this immediately. Not problem at all. More of them, if we will talk about European in general, like European picture in general, it's happened that my military specialty is a drones operator. I am pilot of drones. And in every energy system, you have one thing which named high voltage substation. It's usually a field like 10 hectares or something like this, full of different kind of equipment. In all Central European and most of Eastern European countries, this high voltage substation has no any defense at all. It's even restricted to security to have something like a guns or any kind of weapon when they make some observation of this territory. They are restricted to have any guns. I need 3 Mavic 3 and 1.5 kilo of explosion materials to blow up this high voltage substation. And we have a clear calculation. It's not assumption. I know how to do this. We do some model about European energy system, how it works. If someone blow up 5 high voltage substation, which placed in 2 parts of Germany, Czech, Belgium, and Austria, near 70% of Europe will have blackout, and they will have this blackout situation at minimum for 2 days. And then they will have restriction for power supply, all this territory, which include like 90% of Germany, Belgium, Czech as well, big part of Poland, and. And they will be able to receive electricity in next 2 weeks, maybe for 3-4 hours per day. That's very simple to deliver, like extremely simple to deliver this result. And in my mind, the main problem right now is that no one in Europe even ready to think about this kind of problem. We try to raise this issue and ask, guys, you need some mechanism, you need the tools, you need to create reserve of equipment, you need to create some security rules, you need to defend your key elements of your critical, absolutely critical infrastructure. Because in second day of absence of electricity, you will have a huge panic in your cities. People will panic, especially in case if they will lose fresh water supply. And I very doubt that many cities in Europe has a backup generation capacity to make a fresh up water in the apartments. In Ukraine now we have in each city backup generation for fresh water, for heating, for everything. If we have blackout, it's still operational. But in Europe not. People will panic. And no any real tool except the radio, absolutely right. If you have no mobile, and in Ukraine now we have regulation which is require all mobile operators to have backup capacity up to 8-10 hours in each and every point. When people now buy apartment, one of questions which they ask Do you have an internet provider who is operational in case of power blackout? Because many internet providers in Ukraine invest a huge money to have a backup capacity and to provide service even if power is out. All these elements create our resiliency. We have huge experience. It's very painful experience, but it's unique experience, and we are ready to share. And in my mind, the whole Europe and absolutely underestimate now all these hybrid threats. It's absolutely real. As we can see now in Israeli experience, they double their security for energy stations. They double their security for high voltage power grid. In many events and in many communications, if we have someone from Israel on energy event, they talk to Ukrainians like they can bring you out, and 1 hour you have to answer to them questions from our practical experience, what happened and what to do in different situations. They feel it already. They're doing their best to prevent a terroristic attack to energy infrastructure. What's happened right now in Cuba? Cuba is out of supply for 3 days. It's not a terroristic attack. It's just old equipment and no any investment in modernization and new capacity, but result is the same. People is out of supply, panic, thieves, everything. And nobody knows what to do. And last point is very important, because people is not ready, and people in Europe really don't know what to do if power supply is off. What you will do on third day? What you will do on second day? How you will find some information what's happened? How you will disseminate as a local authority or authority of the country, how you will disseminate information, what people has to do? When power can be back? Because even if you just inform people, oh, after tomorrow you will have some electricity, or you will have some electricity in 1 week, please do something to save yourself. Or you can go to some, I don't know, schools, and you will find generators, and it will be option to take some power there, and. How this information will be disseminated if internet is off, if mobile telecom is off? All this stuff has to be prepared. And in our modern world, it's not something very theoretical. It could happen like very simple. And the question is, are you ready or are you not ready? Different results. Thank you.
Alexander, one more question about all these cables and communication which we have on the under the sea. Yes, we saw this magnetic story with the Nord Stream 2, where the Ukraine was accused by the journalist that it was like Ukrainian operation when we stopped supplies on Nord Stream 2, which before even didn't operate, but still. But how vulnerable and how is there any lessons learned on protection on those interconnections? Do you see some steps from our partners regarding the protection of the connection under the sea, whether we speak about the Black Sea or the Baltics or some other seas?
First of all, any infrastructure is vulnerable, absolutely any. Especially in terroristic country-size threats. Because in real life, I don't believe in this story about Ukrainian attack to Nord Stream 2, just because all this story that someone taken 11 meters yacht in September in Baltic Sea, divers on 120 meters deep, that absolutely night on this deep. And +3, and divers don't work in usually as deep as possible, but very complicated. And what is undersea pipeline? It's like 25 millimeters of steel, which is covered by 1.5 meters of stone, and special stones which push from the vessel when this pipe is built to push them to be on the downside, because in another way pipe can move up and be broken. That it's not something very simple to broke. And I absolutely think it's a fairy tale about some Ukrainian yacht with 8 people who blow up Nord Stream 2. I don't believe in this story. But in general, especially cables really has a big threat. What I'm happy to know, and it's of course it's very limited information, but I see that many Scandinavian countries started monitoring their critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. And I have some very limited news that United Kingdom as well starting some operation in different districts of the sea to monitor Russian presence around this critical infrastructure, telecommunication first of all, and gas pipelines as well. It's the right steps. It's a little bit developed, but I'm very far from idea that it's enough to be absolutely safe.
Thank you. Yanis, now coming to you, which you are should have the professionals' view from European Union, from European country, having your experience in intelligence and in geopolitical advising and security advising. What main lessons for you are from this war, and what is your main recommendation now to Europeans and to Ukrainians?
Let me start off by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk and participate in this very interesting discussion. Secondly, a lot of the most interesting things I was going to say have just been said. But looking at what the lessons for the Baltic states could be from Russia's war against Ukraine, let me start off with some generalities and then get into something more specific. First of all, generals always try to fight the last war, only do it better. The last war is the one that we are watching at the moment taking place in Ukraine. That means that if at some stage in the future Russia, the Kremlin decides that it is going to have a go at NATO, Baltic states being one of the weakest places, then we must not assume that the nature of the war will be the same as the one that we are watching taking place at the moment in Ukraine. In other words, do not assume anything. In about 2009, Ron Asmus, who was a RAND scholar and later Assistant Undersecretary of State in the United States, but unfortunately is no longer with us, wrote a book about the Russia's war in Georgia, and it was called, I think I've got it right, A Little War Which Changed the World. It was a brilliant book, and I thoroughly recommend it, except one thing: the title was wrong. It didn't change the world because the world kept on snoozing despite the alarm call. Then in 2014, there was a much more serious alarm call when Crimea was annexed and Donbass was invaded. And the world, the Western world, said, oh, we've now woken up. We've realized this is serious. And some half-hearted sanctions were put in place. And then slowly we went back to sleep again. And in February 2022, a great shock, despite the fact that the Anglo-Saxon intelligence services had correctly predicted that there would be an attack, had correctly predicted the timing of the attack. The only thing they got completely wrong was the outcome. And I have a theory about that, but I won't talk about it right now. But the Western world is starting to fall asleep again, and I entirely agree with my colleague here. The next point I want to make is to do with information. And the most powerful weapon which Russia has in the war against Ukraine is the information war. And I don't mean in terms of gathering intelligence or disseminating it, but in persuading the world that Russia is winning, which is absolute nonsense. Because if you look at it objectively, the idea of the war, the aim, the first principle of war, selection and maintenance of the aim, was to take Kyiv, to get rid of the fascist dictatorship in Kyiv, and to occupy the whole of Ukraine in 3 days. It did not take place, and in fact Russia was forced to withdraw from northern Ukraine with its tail between its legs, having done some extremely unpleasant things, was forced to abandon Kharkiv, was forced to withdraw across the Dnieper from Kherson, and now is sacrificing, since May, roughly 1,200 Russians every day, who are killed or very seriously wounded so they can't return to battle, for a few kilometers of rubbish, which used to be villages or very small towns. That is not the way to win a war. Yet the West thinks that Russia is winning. And this narrative is the thing that is most dangerous for us, because it also goes parallel with Putin's nuclear threats and the desire by, we're not quite Chatham House, but an old man sitting in the White House to the west of us, to be rather more careful, as elderly men tend to be. I mean, Putin is very careful about his personal security and the possibility of getting COVID, as we know. That is how elderly men tend to behave. But we cannot afford to be intimidated by these threats. We ought to be looking at them objectively. Now, next point, emphasis on deterrence by denial. Kaja Kallas said about 18 months ago that deterrence by punishment, which was the old NATO method, really doesn't work. That would mean that NATO would allow Russia to occupy the Baltic states and then get its act together, and 6 months later come and free us. Now, having seen what happened in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and lots of other places, there would not be any Baltic nations left to liberate. In other words, we have got to do rather more deterrence by denial. There are ways of doing that, and we are seeing how warfare is developing, but I won't go into the detail of that now. The Russians are not going to have a capability of attacking NATO in the next few years. Of course, it depends how many you count, but it's the next few years, because Russia cannot deal with a weakened Ukraine even now. Therefore, they will go into asymmetric warfare, and hybrid has already been mentioned. In other words, despite the fact that in the Washington Summit Declaration it was clearly stated that NATO will respond against hybrid attacks, which are short of Article 5. I wonder what that really means. And there are discussions going on about this, but how serious are those discussions? At the same time, we see that in the last big exchange, in which thankfully we got a live Vladimir Kara-Murza back, which we are all delighted about. The FSB murderer assassin Vadim Krasikov was released from German prison and returned as a hero to a mother Russia. And that person is an assassin. He shot a Georgian opponent of Russia in the back, not even in the front, in the middle of Berlin in broad daylight, was captured. And what this exchange means is that you owe Russian special services operatives, go and do your nasty things, and if you get caught, we will get you back. What that means is that we can expect much more sabotage, assassinations, maybe terrorism against civilians. These are the sort of things that Russia is prepared to do. In the Baltics, what we have seen up to now is a rather pathetic attempt to set fire to the Occupation Museum, but we know for sure that that was instigated by the Russians. And we've seen a hammer attack against Leonid Volkov, one of Navalny's assistants in Lithuania. But these things are likely to increase because Russia cannot attack us militarily, therefore they will do something like this. That is why it's such a good thing that our Prime Minister has clearly stated that as far as the budget is concerned, security is right at the top of the agenda, and as she has said many times, internal and external. The sadness is that the internal has not got the funding that it requires, because in reality, our first line of defense against this kind of hybrid threat are the internal services. Border Guard. This year, we've prevented more than 5,000 or about 5,000 illegal immigrants coming in through Belarus. The police force and the fire and rescue service, who are on the front line in Ukraine every day, and we see that. Now, at the moment, we are not paying them as much as we pay our soldiers, and that is a mistake. And we need to correct that mistake. As far as energy is concerned, we see very clearly that that is the way in which Russia is trying to defeat Ukraine. Not because it could do it on the front lines, it can't, but by destroying critical infrastructure, in particular energy infrastructure, of which Ukraine has a vast amount, at least compared to the Baltic states. And I won't go through the detail, but frankly, we don't have all that many LNG terminals, we don't have all that much storage capacity, nor do we have all that much energy, electricity generation capability. And sabotage of those could leave us very vulnerable, as indeed with the undersea cables. Yes, it is publicly known that NATO is now paying serious attention to this, but they are not easy to guard, and that is why a Chinese ship dragging its anchor for 7 nautical miles managed to break the Finnish-Estonian gas pipeline. Now, that's just trying it out. If we don't assume that Russia has got plans for all of the critical undersea pipelines in the Baltic states, then we are being unbelievably naive. I think I will stop here. I could carry on, but you said at the beginning 5 to 10 minutes. What I would say is that it is particularly important for us to stick together, and I think the Crimean platform is so important. We need to learn from Ukraine, from your fantastic example, and we need to do everything that we can to support you. And it's not just we, when I say the Baltic states and the other frontline states who are doing a reasonable amount. We need to try to do a great deal more to help the rest of Western Europe wake up. Because no matter who wins the presidential election on the 5th of November, we are going to be increasingly looking after our own backyard. That means dealing with Russia, because the United States is going to be focusing on China. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, very impressive. And there are so many points I would like to refer, about the informational influence of Russia, creating the view that they are winning this war. Yes, yesterday Putin on BRICS in Kazan, on BRICS sitting in Kazan, said that you don't know history if you think that you can strategically defeat Russia. And we have this Crimean war, which they lost. We have Afghanistan war, which they lost. But they continue to create this bubble of the undefeated Russia. Yeah.
Yes, I think that is particularly amusing, because every time that Russia has lost a war, and I think there are a number of examples in the last 170 years, 1856 Crimea, of course, 1905 Japan, 1917 against the German Axis, and of course Afghanistan. Every time the defeat has been followed by major political change in Russia herself. And I think that in the Kremlin, if not at the very top of the Kremlin, there is some understanding that if they cannot sell whatever the end of the war against Ukraine is as a victory, then that could well mean not only the political end of Putin, but also his personal physical end. And I think that there may be a lot of people in positions of power who want to keep that power, keep their money, keep their influence, who are now looking at what the outcomes might be, and whether it is better to be a vassal of China or to give up this idiocy, the last bit of European imperialism, in order to try to build bridges with the West again. And I suspect that that's the direction that we're likely to see sometime. But just as in the 1980s, we knew the Soviet Union was going to fall over, but we didn't know it was going to take 3 months or 30 years. We don't know how long it's going to take for this Kremlin to fall over.
Just several words. Historical fact that its last 500 years, Moscow lose each and every war where Ukraine was not a part of Moscow. Each and every. I hope we will keep this tradition.
Yeah, but before going to questions from the audience, you just said that we don't know how long this war will go. Yes, and we don't know how much it will take from us to win this war. So we are somewhere in very long-term campaign, because even if tomorrow the very active operation will stop, we still will have Russia with its aggressive policy. They will still have missiles for attacking. Forces for subversion. So if we will speak about what we can do practically now, we as Europe, Ukraine, practically, what are the key issues to focus? I would like from all of you just like to mention one or two key issues which you recommend to focus to change the situation and to be more resilient and more prepared. Victor?
In my opinion, the nature of the war changed. We speak about traditionally ground war, war in the air and on the sea. But time shows for us all, we can speak about psychological war against the personal and about the war in cyberspace. To those big problems, for example, in Ukraine, we got two big attacks on energy system in Kyiv district and Ivano-Frankovsk district in 2014, and we get a very big problem. Maybe preparing of the cyber security and preparing of personnel against the information attack is very important in the moment.
From angle of critical infrastructure, we have just two very clear, very simple words: integration and experience exchange. That's two directions which will lead us to resilient energy and other critical infrastructure, both in Ukraine and Europe.
Yanis.
I'll be a bit more specific. A few months ago, the artillery ratio that Ukraine was able to fire compared to Russia was 1 to 5. It is now 1 to 2, even though half of Russia's artillery supplies are coming from North Korea. In other words, everything we have heard about going on to a war economy, yes, it is, but it's not doing the business. It's not able to do it. And the other thing, which is really important in terms of sanctions, is that the missiles which Russia is getting both from Iran and from North Korea have the components which have been manufactured in a number of Western European countries, and provably in the last 2 years, 22, 23. That's, this is evidence. It's been found, which means that there are ways in which our sanctions are being circumvented in order to use high-tech components, which are then given to the Russians, which they then use against civilian targets and also military, but particularly civilian targets in Ukraine. Well, that is a major failure on the part of the West, and we really ought to be able to sort it out. We are now in the European Union 14th package of sanctions. Well, we need to get a move on and do a bit more. Then there is demography. Thank God Gerasimov is still the chief of defense in Russia and not somebody like Surovikin who's competent. Gerasimov maintains the old system which allowed the Soviet Union to win the Great Patriotic War. In 1941, at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, it's impossible to tell exactly, but the average age of the Soviet Union was something a little over 20, because it was an agrarian economy, 8, 10 children, families were normal, therefore you had lots of cannon fodder. The Russian statistics about the average age of Russians in February of 2002 is 39.4. They do not have the cannon fodder. And on top of that, Putin is absolutely scared stiff of what will happen if he starts sending conscripts into the suicidal fights that Russian commanders are making them take, and another mobilization could really be the catalyst which breaks the Kremlin. In other words, tactics really matter in this case.
Okay, so if there are any questions from the audience, please raise your hands, name yourself, and let's start from the gentleman and then, yeah.
Roland Slapuķe from Latvia. You did not mention, except you at the beginning, the new possible involvement of North Korea, which is a kind of internationalization of the war. So I would like to have your comments about it. How do you see that in Ukraine and in NATO?
We will take the second question from Elena, and then probably we'll give the answers. No? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, hello, thank you, Alina, for convening this very interesting panel. My name is Elina Lang. I'm from NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence here in Riga. I just wanted to follow up on the resilience, the people. And the reason why I mentioned the radio and the wood burner is because our government and media has been banging on about the 72-hour bag. We get social ads every other day. My elderly mother was in shock because without any warning on television, she all of a sudden saw information about what she should do in the case of a nuclear attack. And she was standing there asking me, is this happening now? And I said, no, Mom, it's not happening now. Don't worry. So things are being done. But I think one of the problems that, and I don't like this concept of post-Soviet countries, but unfortunately we are a post-Soviet country, same as Ukraine. And I think in our countries, one of the main problems has always been this mentality that somebody else will take care of it, state will take care of it. And we don't have this, at least in Ukraine, it has, I believe, changed since 2014. Very radically, but my question probably goes to Mr. Kažociņš. Do you think there is more we can do to increase this understanding among people that a lot of it is and will be in our personal hands? Their government's responsibilities are in fact very limited. For example, National Guard. I've been in forums where our regional media is saying, for your question, what we will do if there's a blackout, they say, but we will go to our local National Guard unit, they will give us generator. And National Guard is terrified and they say, that's not our job. Yeah, that is not our job. We have generator, but we are legally mandated to use it for other things. And only when there is literally military invasion, that's when we actually use those generators and do something. So maybe your comment on this aspect. Thank you.
Okay, so first question on North Korea and the second about the responsibility.
Shall I kick off?
You start.
Right, let me start with North Korea. The South Koreans appear to have confirmed their view that 3,000 are already in Russia. Other sources suggest that the total is going to be 12,000 who apparently are special forces, but if we bear in mind that North Korea has 200,000 special forces, then they can't be all that special, really. 12,000 is about 2 brigades. 2 brigades is not going to be enough, and one of the reasons why North Korea might have been prepared to do this is to get some battle experience, because they have not fought in any significant way anywhere since the Korean War, which is around the sort of time that I was born, which is a very long time ago. Of course, it does raise the question of third parties, and that may be a very interesting way of the West being able to help Ukraine in the future if it is proven that there are North Korean troops involved in active attacks against Ukraine, because I don't understand myself why US service personnel can be deployed to Israel to provide a high-level, most modern missile defense against a possible Iranian counter to the counterattack that Israel almost certainly will make following Iran's attack against Israel a few weeks ago. How can US troops be in Israel to protect Israel? And why is it impossible for the West to deploy air defense assets or even cover Ukrainian air defense from outside Ukraine with the sort of aircraft that NATO does possess and the huge air superiority we have over Russia? Because at the end of the day, Russia isn't even able to deal with Ukraine's air force, never mind NATO's. In answer there, my family, this is a state secret, by the way, have our own generator, which is not untypical. I think a lot of generators were bought over the last 10 years, and particularly more since 2022. It is a question of self-sufficiency, and I think that the education program, which is now this academic year, has been brought in to all schools, in which all children are have to take some sort of instruction in basic security procedures. In other words, if they witness a fire somewhere, they know what to do. If they see a car accident, they know what to do. And part of that also is thinking about much more serious aspects. This has broad popular support. We have only really started it seriously not long ago, but at least we've started. And we're on the way there. And a lot more needs to be done in terms of civil defense. I'll stop here.
Victor, Alexander, do you want to add something? Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we will try to sum up and to say like maybe one few words about the future security configuration. Yes, how we see. You mentioned about deterrence, which actually collapsed as an approach of the Western countries to deterrence. What global lessons we can take from this war? Yes, we're still inside. We still don't see the situation very clear, in future very clear. But what we can do now to make the world is more secure, and how it would look like with future security configuration.
One from the best ways of common work and changing of European security is maybe for today the work foreign instructors in Ukraine and study of Ukrainian cadets in military schools on the Western Europe. Maybe this is way for multiple hour lessons for all, and bring new West tactics, techniques and procedures in Ukrainian armed forces.
Let me say more not about security, but about resiliency. And resiliency, it's like a onion. You have a lot of layers, then you will succeed. And layer number one, it's what Victor mentioned. It's a military level. Air defense, physical security, other stuff. Then you have like a national security issue. Like example, reserve of equipment. For business reason, you never want to freeze money to buy some equipment which you don't use next day, because it's a loss of money. But for security reason, you have to create a reserve of equipment. You have to have a lot of equipment to replace something if it's damaged or destroyed. It's a regulation. It means state have to change regulation and make more resiliency to the system itself through regulation. Then you have municipality. You have municipality who also can do a lot for resiliency for critical infrastructure. Backup generation, additional capacity, more sources of generation in case of blackout or something. Everything is available. And then you have like a personal level. In Ukraine, many even multi-apartment buildings now has a battery storage inside the apartment. And if we have some blackout, people use a battery storage and you have supply for 10, 12 hours without any problem. Because in multi-apartment buildings, you can't use generator. It's like technically not possible, just very dangerous. And a lot of other tools, but on personal level, you also have some resiliency. And the main idea is we have to discuss, communicate, and push all the layers to be really successful.
Thank you, Yanis.
Let me look a little bit more broadly. Ukraine and NATO. When this war is over, I think Ukraine will join NATO very quickly, and not because Ukraine will be begging to join NATO, but because NATO will be begging Ukraine to join, because Ukraine will have the largest armed forces in Europe, will have the most equipment, will have the greatest experience, and will be a bulwark for the defense of free Europe. As far as the United States is concerned, we have got to understand that no matter who wins, Europe is going to have to look after ourselves, because the United States' big challenge in the short and medium term is China. The United States will not objectively be able to deal with China on her own. The United States badly needs allies, and NATO allies are not the ones who are going to help in the Asia-Pacific region. It needs Asia-Pacific allies, particularly Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, maybe even India. And those allies, potential allies and allies, are looking very carefully at how reliable the United States is. And if the United States were to allow Ukraine to sink, then there is a great possibility that some of these allies without whom the US foreign policy in the medium term is going to fail will start to look at building bridges with Chinese Communist Party, which would be a dramatic failure. In other words, in my view, and I've heard this in Washington as well, the long-term interest of United States goes directly, strangely enough, through Kyiv and Article 5 in the Baltic states.
Well, yes, absolutely agree with you, and that. At the same time, yes, at the same time that Europe needs to pay more attention to protecting itself and to deterring and to protecting the way of living and style of living we all want to have and to keep after this war. And Ukraine is crucial. The war started from Crimea. The war should end with releasing Crimea and Black Sea, and that could be a very like a good example of how to rebuild the security, how to renew the international law, and how to demonstrate resilience of democracy states to different challenges. Thank you for my very brave and open participants of this panel, and thank you for all the participants in this room who stayed with us. And with this, we closing actually this parliamentary summit of Crimean Platform, an expert part of it. And I hope to see you all at our Black Sea Security Forum, which is part of the Crimean Platform, at the Crimean Platform Summit next year and Parliamentary Summit next year. Thank you.